another tutorial with the Essentials Club. I'm Maddie, and today I am going to be taking you through a super simple DIY make. It's a skirt that's going to be kind of like a wrap style, but down one of the legs we're going to have a button-up split section where it comes together. And I've been wanting to add something like this to my wardrobe for quite a while now, so I'm so excited to bring it to life and take you through the steps of how to make it for yourself also. So let's get stuck into it. What you'll need to make this is some fabric. Ideally go for something that's a little bit thicker, maybe like a denim or even a really thick cotton or linen, as something too flimsy just won't fit quite as nice. So keep that in mind when you're looking for some fabric. We'll also need some buttons. I would suggest a minimum of 5, as that will cover the leg split section. And then if you want the effect of the buttons to go all the way down to bottom, you can just figure out how much more you want to add. We also need some thread and then the matching bobbin. I'm just going to be using black on this white fabric so you can see it and it stands out a lot more, but otherwise go for something that matches your fabric and that will blend in much nicer. We also need some fabric chalk, measuring tape, some pins, as well as a hand stitching needle for adding on the buttons, some fabric scissors, and then our trusty old sewing machine. So now that we've got all that, let's jump into the steps of making this garment. So essentially what we'll be doing is cutting out one rectangle and fitting that to a point where it wraps around us and that we can button down that front section. First up, we need our measuring tape and our phone or a pen and paper to write down these measurements. We need to find our widest point so that the fabric can wrap all the way around that. For me, that is my butt area, and that ends up being 41 inches. So once you've found your widest point measurement, we're going to add 8 inches. 2 inches to each end so that has enough space for it to overlap, and then also another 2 inches for seam allowance so we can make some nice clean hemlines. And that's going to be the cutting width. And then to find the cutting length, we're going to find how long we want this skirt to be. So this is up to personal preference. You might want it to be a midi style or a mini style or a full maxi style. I'm drawn to the midi length, so I'm going to measure from my belly button, as it's going to be a high-waisted fit, all the way down to just below my knee, as that's where I want it to finish. Again, I'm going to add seam allowance, and you should too, so once you've found that length, add on 3 inches for plenty enough seam allowance. So now that we've got those 2 measurements, it's time to cut out the fabric. Next, it's time to lay out the fabric and use those measurements that we found to mark out a rectangle. So my width was 41 inches plus 8 inches, which equals 49 inches. So I'll start marking that out for my width. And I know that I want my stripes to go downways. That's why I'm measuring my width this way. So make sure if you have a pattern or something like that, that you know it wants to be upways, do the width along that, and then the length down the pattern you want to be up straight. Once we've marked out the width, we then mark out the length. So that was our ideal length from the belly button down to the place where we want it to stop, plus the 3 inches. For me, that ends up being 30 inches all up. So I'll mark that out and then cut out the rectangle. Okay, we're gonna have to do a bit of maths for this next step, so bear with me. We measured our widest point, which for me was my butt, and then we know that this will be sitting up at our waist. And if we go to wrap this thing around us at the moment, it's going to be all bunched up and weird because it doesn't match the silhouette of our body. So we need to add some dart points to the sides up the top to help the fit of this skirt match our body. So we're going to measure our waist area and then take that away from our butt area. So for me, my waist was 35 inches, which means that's a 10-inch difference from my butt to my waist. So I know I need to hide 10 inches within my dart points. So I'm going to delegate half to each, which is 5 inches per dart. And then when we do a dart, we actually do it on the fold. So when I measure out my darts, I need it to be 2.5 inches. So if you got lost, I'll repeat it again. So measure your waist, measure your butt, take the waist away from the measurement, and that will give us the difference that we need to take in at the dart points. And then we halve that amount and delegate that to each dart point. And then knowing that we're going to be measuring it on the fold, we then halve it again. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so I need to put 2.5 inches on the fold for each of these darts. So if it helps, write down that dart measurement so that we can put it aside and forget about it and move on to the next equation. Because I want the split of the skirt, which is essentially just the edges of this rectangle, over my leg, the dart points aren't going to be evenly halfway. It essentially means I want 1/3 of the skirt of the front to be there, and then the other 2/3 covering the rest of my body. My full width of this panel that I cut is 38 inches. I'm going to halve that, which equals 19 inches. I'm then going to divide that by 3. And the reason I'm doing that is, again, we're finding this 1/3, and that's where we're going to put our first dart point. So 19 divided by 3 equals like 6.3, so I'm going to round that up to 6.5. I'm going to figure out which point is this top or bottom of my skirt, and then pop a mark at 6.5 inches. We then measure in our half dart, which we figured out would be on the fold. So for me that was 2.5, and then I'll put another dot 2.5 from there. So the first dot just indicates where I'll start sewing, the second dot indicates where it's going to be on the fold, and then the third dot is again the sewing line that will meet the other side when I fold it. So from that third dot I'm going to measure out 19 inches, which is going to be my full back length. Pop a mark in there, and then again do the same process where I mark out the half dart, which is 2.5, mark out the other half dart, which is again 2.5, and then from that other edge, that should be the rest of the amount that will cover this front section. Probably put some extra notes in a blog post that I'll link in the description just so it reiterates what I'm saying in writing in case that didn't make sense. So now that we've got all those dots in place, we're just going to fold it with the good sides facing on those dot points. Fold it on the middle one and then align the two outside ones. Pin it in place, and then we're going to figure out how far we want this dart to go down. So grab your measuring tape, and because this will be on the side here, hold your measuring tape up at that waist point, and then you want to figure out how far it takes to get down to your hip and where you want it to start going outwards again. So for me that's about 7 inches, so I know from this top point 7 inches down is where I want it to start meeting the edge again. Pop a mark at your point that you found, and then you just simply get your measuring tape, find the dot up the top and then the dot down the bottom where you want it to end, and draw a line between those two, and that helps create that dart line. I found if you just do the dart on the edge, it ends up having these pointy weird bits on the side, so once I actually get to that bottom point, I'm just going to continue sewing all the way down to the bottom, so it essentially ends up creating a side seam, but it just helps stopping it from having this pointy edge that clearly shows there's a dart point there. Righty, I'm going to pin that all in place and sew it, and then try it on and make sure that it's fitting all good around the hip area. So I've tried that on and I'm really happy with the top half, how it hugs my hips now. One thing I did notice is the overlapping section, there's quite a bit of it, which is totally fine. It's better to have too much than not enough. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to keep the shorter side nice and straight, and the longer front side I'm actually going to cut more on an angle so it splits out and has that nice effect. So I've got my longer side in front of me. I figured that I could take 2 inches from the top. So from the top edge I'm going to measure in 2 inches, put a dot there, and then just cut all the way at an angle down to that bottom, so it just kind of slightly veers. So once I cut that angle, I know it's going to have a better fit, so I'm going to do the double fold literally on every edge so that it's got a nice clean finish now. This would be a good time to double check that you're happy with the length of it and make any adjustments to that, but I'm really happy with everything, so double fold all around the edges for the final hem, and then it's time to add on the buttons and we have a skirt. How easy. So obviously at the top we have added these dart points, which means that the top edge is kind of on a bit of a curved style now, and that's really hard to create a folded edge because as you go along it, it's obviously not straight, so it starts to bunch up weirdly at random points. So what I do is I actually start folding from the center point outwards, and then I also sew that way as well. So that way if you sew it in sections, it means that you can have more control over it, and if you start from the center and work your way out, you've got more of an ability to change things as you go, and the edges are more adaptable. As I said, I had quite a bit of extra overlapped area, so that meant that I could make some really oversized hems on these side edges, and I think that comes up nicely when you've got a button up area anyway. So I'm just double folding them, and the bottom section I'm going to experiment with leaving raw for now, so that's why it's going to be all frayed in that style, and then I'll wear it a few times and see if I like it. If not, then I can just easily hem that up. I don't know why, but with dart points I always get really scared cutting them off because I feel like, what if I want to make this larger as I get older, or I just like having the choice of changing things. So I normally just leave it and hide it in the top hem section, but if you find that yours is bulging out too much, that's no problem. Just cut it near that sewed line that you added in there, and then just remember to zigzag on the edges so it doesn't fray. Once we got all the edges hemmed and looking nice and clean, we're going to throw it back on and figure out the fit that we want it to be when the buttons are in place. Let's work our way from the top to the bottom. So we'll pull the top so it's nice and snug so that when it's buttoned together, it'll sit there and not fall off. Put a pin on the under edge where the top edge aligns, so when you go to unfold it, you can easily take the skirt off. Continue this process and figure out where you want the leg split to happen. I want mine to be about mid-thigh, so I pop a pin there where the two edges meet there, and then just continue pinning across that edge. When you take it off, lay it down on the table. I've grabbed one of my buttons and a bit of fabric chalk, and we're going to mark out on this top section where the buttonholes will go. So the under section is where the buttons are going, and then the top section is where the holes are going and where the buttons will come through. We want one button to go at the very top, and what I do is just mark out the very top of this button, underneath this button, and then just draw a line from those two dots, and that is going to be where our buttonhole goes. We want to make sure that the buttonhole is big enough that obviously the designated buttons can easily go in. So by doing that, it should mean that there's enough room. Once we've got that first hole marked out, we're going to grab our measuring tape and figure out how far apart we want the second buttonhole to be. It depends on the look you're going for and the fit and personal preference that you're after, but I'm going to space them out so the top and bottom of each buttonhole is about 3 inches apart. So that distant apart, hopefully when you sit down or bend down, means that it won't like gape open and people can see through. 3 inches, put a mark there, and then again just do the same process where you align the button. We've already got that top mark there, and then we just add a bottom mark, draw that line, and essentially we just continue that process until we're done with our buttonholes. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, you can obviously have buttons down the whole skirt, but maybe just for looks and you don't use them all. It's up to personal preference how you make this look. I'm just going to put buttons down to the point where it splits. Once we've marked out these lines for the buttonholes, it's time to sew an outer edge for it. You might have a buttonhole foot, which means that you can add that on and just press away and switch your machine to whatever setting you need to for that. But that overwhelms me a little bit. So what I normally do is I just switch my machine to the zigzag, make it on like a medium setting, and then to the length of the shortest amount. I then do a zigzag above the line, a zigzag line all the way down the side, down the bottom, and then again down the other side. And then that ends up forming this rectangle that protects the buttonhole, and that means that once we cut it, it won't fray. So once you have all these rectangles in place, we just grab some scissors or an unpicker and open up this hole in between this section. If you do by any chance happen to cut the threads of the box outside of this, that's fine. Just zigzag over it again to make sure that it holds it in place and that it won't come undone. So now that's all done, we are going to lay out the skirt just how we had it before, where the shorter side is underneath. And then we then align this edge with those pins that we put in place. So we've got the top edges matching, we've got the pins aligned to this outer edge of the top. Grab a bit of fabric chalk or even a pencil, and through these buttonholes that we've created, we're going to add marks to indicate where we're going to add the buttons onto the underneath fabric. That way it's all nice and aligned. Once you have those marks in place, it's time to thread the hand needle. So how we do this is we obviously grab some thread, put this through the open hole of the hand needle, and take about 30 inches so that when it's folded and full length, there's about 15 in. We then add a double or triple knot about 3 inches from the edge, and that way it should stop it from coming in as we pull it through the fabric. We align the button with the dot that we placed on the fabric. We then come up underneath with the hand needle through one of the buttonholes and just keep going through the button back up through the fabric. And I do this in a bit of an X pattern. There's no real right or wrong way, just as long as it gets added on and it's nice and secure. Do this a few times until you can pull the button and it doesn't come off, and then cut the end of the thread off and tie this underneath. Repeat this for the rest of the buttons. And that is your skirt all done. If you followed along, I would love to see how it turned out. Please tag me at the Essentials Club or DM me on Instagram. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed following along, or at least just seeing how this turned out. I'll show you how this looks in action, and I will see you in the upcoming videos.